The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now, your host for Faith Matters, Ben Ball.
Hey, welcome to the program. Good to have you along with us here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 at AM 1240. And I'm joined with Reverend Mark Woods, Dr. Ron Monteperdo, and Reverend Robert Cornigi, who's with us here today and looking at the matters of faith as they present themselves to us in the world that we live in. And we'll talk about some of these issues here today. And welcome, gentlemen. Good to have everybody here.
Good morning.
All right. And as we get started here today, interesting confluence of dates here today. Last Thursday apparently was the annual Religious Freedom Day. I didn't know that, actually, until I read this article. But it was also last Sunday, Sanctity of Life Sunday, and then you had the March for Life also this week. So interesting comments that are being made across the press. And looking at one that's in the Washington Post, it actually comes from, though, the Religion News Service, which we sometimes read from. Judd Birdsall writes, commentary, Obama's religious freedom record is strong. In his opening paragraph, he says, Barack Obama's critics allege that the president doesn't practice what he preaches on international religious freedom policy. Last week, they pounced on the apparent gap between presidential rhetoric and reality. On Thursday, January 16th, the same day that Obama issued his annual Religious Freedom Day proclamation, Religion News Service published an article highlighting his administration's failure to quickly nominate a new ambassador at large for religious freedom. And further on in the article, it talks about the critics of that. As in its proclamation, it says, America proudly stands with the people of every nation who seek to think, believe, and practice their faith as they choose. He promised that his administration, quote, will remain committed to promoting religious freedom. Critics aren't so sure. The RNS article quotes Georgetown University's Tom Farr as lamenting a continued vacancy, meaning the ambassadorship, will confirm the suspicion that it already exists among foreign governments, persecutors, victims, and American diplomats that the issue is not a priority. So who is right? The author says, yes. They're both right to some degree. Ron, you have experience in foreign diplomacy. I wasn't even aware that we had an ambassador for religious freedom. Has this been around? Is this that you're aware of for some time?
Beginning in the late 1970s, early 1980s, actually it was in the mid-70s, there began a drive in the State Department, well, in government generally, to broaden the scope of, broaden the definition of diplomacy to include a wide number of what we would call people-to-people contacts. And that theme, or that idea, has been present in Washington for, I guess, about 40 years now. Different presidents and different administrations choose to give it different emphasis.
Right.
And it's because it is not specifically within the mainstream of, quote, diplomacy, unquote. It's often regarded with, a lot of people don't understand what it's all about. And so it tends to be below the horizon. It tends not to get a lot of publicity, not a lot of notice. I would say that in this particular case, it's unfortunate. I mean, it shouldn't take so long to nominate an ambassador. But looking back on the last 30 years, it takes forever to nominate anybody, irrespective of what the job is.
Yes.
So I wouldn't take the delay as an example, as an indicator of the administration's sincerity, either for or lack of sincerity on the whole matter. It's just a fact. It's just a political fact of life.
But where do we look at in the past years now, and now halfway through second administration of the President Obama, as far as his emphasis on religious freedom? We do see the article quotes Secretary of State John Kerry saying that, I say to my fellow State Department employees, all of them, wherever you are, I want to reinforce a simple message. I want you to go out and engage religious leaders and faith-based communities in our day-to-day work. Robert, is the political side of this, that engagement, that sort of idea of being part of public policy, is that the same as an idea of supporting religious freedom, or is it simply just basically a means to an end?
Yeah, it's a way, like the author of that article, I'd say yes. It's both. Mm-hmm. You know, there are obviously political. When you look at a country as, you know, just our national identity is very religious, depending on whatever that religious perspective is. But there's a lot of religious people in the United States. You know, it's 70-80% that claim to have some belief in God, and so, you know, as a function of foreign relations, you know, we're involved in a lot of different areas. You know, economically, politically, educationally, socially. You know, the State Department, I would assume, is one of many arms of our foreign relations outreach efforts.
Sure.
And they're going to, you know, realistically, you've got to engage the religious communities, particularly when you're going in. You know, religion doesn't just mean Christian. Religion means whatever religious perspective. So, you know, this Islamic, you know, there's been a real push within this administration to further develop relationships, sort of nominal relationships within the Islamic states or communities or whatever it is. So we have seen a concerted effort towards that, and that would fall under that umbrella of religious relations, religious freedoms, that kind of thing. I would think, not necessarily just Christian.
I think the fact that the person answers yes in this kind of shows our own confusion with what religious freedom is. I think most of the time the argument, most people aren't going to say, no, we shouldn't have religious freedom. But when we start talking about what religious freedom is, that becomes a little bit more complicated in the sense that is it that everyone's beliefs are on equal footing and all matters, you know, in that sense. The problem with that is some of those beliefs come in contact with one another.
Sure.
And are contradictory. So then does religious freedom become, well, we protect... Who do we protect in this thing? You know, the state kind of becomes the protector of, well, whose religious freedom are we? You know, the great
or where they come in conflict, who decides?
Who decides? You know, and a perfect example of this would be we talked about it a few weeks ago about the bishops saying that healthcare reform and providing contraception to in Catholic hospitals, right.
or even private employers, and
that's right. I mean, and on one hand, that's a religious freedom for some people. On the other hand, it is not a religious freedom thing. So I think sometimes this person, by answering yes to both questions, kind of suggests we're not really sure what we mean by religious freedom. Well, I mean, Alistair McIntyre, you might be able to say would come to this question and say, well, which religion freedom? You know what I mean? Whose religious freedom? You know, I think that's maybe a more of an appropriate question than.
Well, let me go back again, just Ron, from the political stage. Again, as you said, every administration decides what kind of emphasis they're going to give on this. Is this something that we need to be more concrete on, or is this, from a political aspect, is an administration free to decide what religious freedom is?
There are different questions. There are different levels of analysis for all of this. On the one hand, it's very good for the United States, and you know, I think we're all proud that the United States does stand for religious freedom. And that's one level, and that's why you have an ambassador. As I think it says in the article, the ambassador is the public face of America's stand and position on the issue of religious freedom. Then there's another level of analysis. Okay, if you're a State Department functionary sitting in an embassy someplace, and it's your job to report on the state of the country in which you are operating, and you want to make an assessment of different religious groups, particularly if they have some political agendas or relevance. And this gets to Mark's point. And so you take it that way. And so what do you have? You have a general orientation expressed at the level of ambassador, but then you have a bunch of very specific judgments and so on, and we can't confuse the two. So what I'm saying here is that, yes, religious freedom is he's very cynical about it. It is an important arrow in the quiver of arrows that we have for the conduct of foreign policy. The ambassadorship is one of those arrows, and there are a bunch of other arrows that we can also use. There's millions of things, many things that we don't even think about. How often do Catholics and Protestants get together to talk about ecumenical issues?
Right.
Or Jews and Christians get together. And the State Department, our government is deeply involved in a supportive way, and sometimes may even finance these kinds of things.
The article suggests that the real job of the ambassador, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is to, it says towards the end, to protect the rights of people who suffer around the world on account of their faith. And that seems to be the role of the ambassador, is to put it just in other words, to get people not to kill each other
over their faith.
Yeah. Which we do have a significant history of doing those kinds of things. So maybe that's a way to get at religious freedom.
Well, as we continue this discussion here, too, I think I want to look at what we have talked about a little bit before about whether you can put religious freedom in the box of freedom to worship, or where does that conflict with the free expression of religion, too. And I think it speaks some to Mark's idea of those conflicts that come up as well. As we continue on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and I'm Ben Ball with Reverend Robert Carnegie from Chapel by the Sea. We have also Dr. Ron Monteperdo from Carteret Community College and Reverend Mark Woods from Cherry Point United Methodist Church. And we're talking in this first article, we're looking at an article as a commentary on the Obama's Religious Freedom Record. And it's from the Washington Post, but it actually comes out of the Religion News Service as well. And Judd Birdsall, who was a seasoned diplomat, by the way, he was a former U.S. diplomat and current doctoral candidate at Cambridge University. When we talk about these matters, and Robert, let me come to you first, I think. When we talk about these matters of where we are looking at the free expression of religion, perhaps, versus the freedom to worship, and we saw Secretary of State Hillary Clinton mention about freedom of worship. And we commented at the time that, well, that isn't that kind of boxing religion into the four corners of your institution, of your church,
right,
as opposed to the free expression of religion. It kind of been thinking about this and reading about this, though from a diplomatic standpoint, I can see that's kind of a neat, not a bad way to go. I mean, it's sort of an easy way to define it without stepping on too many toes, except for back here in the States.
Yeah, I think there's always a category mistake that's easily made in these kind of things, because in governmental affairs and political processes, there's always this sense of compromise and negotiation.
Right.
And so you can do that in areas, for instance, economics, education, lots of different areas that governments have. Different governments will have relationship with each other, and they'll go through these processes and do all that. But when it comes to religion, that is not. It's more problematic, let's say, in areas of compromise, of negotiation, of consensus.
The proponents are not exactly willing participants in
and
compromise.
so that's why that the government involvement in when you're, historically we've always had a reasonably bright line between government and religion. I mean, there's always an interaction there, but it's constitutionally we've declared that they're kind of two different arenas. And but what we're seeing, as you go into other theocratic nations, an Islamic nation, there is no bright line between the political and the theological I mean, they're conflated. They're all together, and so it's us going into an Islamic country, for example, just to state that as an illustration, we're coming with a different worldview than they have. So those negotiations, I can understand why the State Department says we have to do this, because it's such a huge part of their political reality on that side. Whereas more democratic nations, more Western nations, let's put it that way, Judeo-Christian, if you will, where we've kind of teased those two apart, it creates a real challenge.
It's one thing to say that we have to do this, another thing to say, how do we do this?
Exactly.
And
the expectations of what we can do, what we can accomplish, I think.
And Ron, in a diplomatic circle, I mean, isn't one of the political quicksands, I would think, here would be that that so often America is viewed, it seems to be viewed by other countries as well, let's put it this way. People who speak out about faith are viewed as representing America in a sense that we often mistakenly look at any Muslim as being like any other Muslim in difference. And so they might look at somebody who's representing themselves as a religious freedom diplomat as representing religion in America, and the state approved.
That's why it's such a ticklish thing to appoint and above all to conduct oneself as an ambassador to freedom of religion, because that's the challenge. The principle is freedom of religion, and you ought to be able to talk to any other head of state or any other diplomat about freedom of religion. And I think you're quite right. And this is no fault of any of the candidates or anything. But they are inevitably going to be identified as part of a larger United States agenda to somehow spread its own religion, or to be anti-Islamic, or to be pro-Jewish, or anti-Hindu, or pro-Muslim, or something. And basically, you can't win.
If the religious freedom diplomat, Mark, shows up at your office and you're a diplomat from another country, you've got to they think you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, especially if their thing is to kind of broker peace between these religious fractions. But that does beg the question of whether it is religion that is causing the problem here,
right,
or it's actually political identity or nation-state identity. I mean, when the ambassador at large for international religious freedom, their seal is the seal of the United States Department of State. This is not, the cross and flame of Methodism, or
anything
this
else.
is the seal of the state. And so I can understand that being very difficult, because it's one that we want to pride ourselves on separation of church and state, and yet here is this ambassador at large for religious freedom suggesting that it is somehow the state's responsibility to broker peace between warring religions. But I'll say my question again, and Ron's going to come after me, and I hope you do, Ron. That's still going to suggest that the problem is religion. The problem is theology. I mean, this is the thing that you're going to hear this all over on the internet and articles about, what causes problem is this religion. Just get rid of the religion, and then you wouldn't have any problems. That presupposes that it is not actually nation-state politics. It is not political identity or even national identity that actually is what's starting, is actually where the violence is arising from, as opposed to it arising theologically from two differing positions.
It's not the job of the ambassador to broker anything. It's the job of the ambassador to uphold the principle of freedom of religion. Now, you can come at it, people with very different views, even conflicting religious views, can come together and have a rational discussion about freedom of religion and how one goes about getting it. I think it was Jacques Maritain who was involved in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He said, you can agree on objectives as long as you stay away from the principles that get you to that objective, and you can institute programs and you can do various number of things and avoid that. Now, it seems to me that try to put some perspective on this without really disagreeing with Mark, that's a different question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the state that does it, or religion, and that whole thing? That it is an effort, part of a larger effort, to create an institutional environment in which a dialogue or discussion can take place. We agree on freedom of religion, and I think it's very good that the United States gets into that. Now, it's very different from saying it's the ambassador's job to promote Christian religion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Right. But what is the view of the one, whoever they're talking to? That becomes, I think,
that's a different problem, and that's a different issue,
Yeah.
and it's very complicated.
Well, I'll go. We were talking a bit in the break. I would say that you have also conflicts that are tribal in nature, and that a tribe may identify with a religion, another tribe may identify with a religion, and the concept of either one of them being free to express their religion or freedom to express another religion is pretty foreign.
Exactly. Well, and that's why religious freedom, I think, is the right term to use, ambassador of religious freedom. But the really what we're talking about is religious tolerance, and that this is to us with our history, we know we can relate to what that means. But someone in a theocracy where their religion is a part of their identity as a nation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's built into their system. There's some big ground to cover right there. There's some processing that needs to go on there. So we can advocate for religious freedom, but
I mean, a minor book that I've recommended to y'all before, that In the Land of Blue Burqas. So the young lady who spent time in Afghanistan writes about how it was just a foreign concept. I mean, they just had no thought that this could even exist, and why would it exist that you would have freedom of religion? They didn't understand why it would be desirable.
Because in the context of the Muslim way of things, just like Christianity, Muslims are a community, and the head of the community is the head of the community, and the head of the community makes the decisions for the community.
Mm-hmm.
Hence we have the term caliph, and and one of the things that so-called Muslim fundamentalists want is the restoration of community under a caliph.
Caliphate.
The caliphate, okay? So you do that. Now that doesn't mean you still can't have a question, a dialogue or a discussion with a caliph, who believes all that about religious freedom. Doesn't mean you can't do that. And there's an argument can be made that many of the caliphs had a system that was quite tolerant of other religions. Put them in an inferior position, of course, but they didn't kill them. They were able to practice their religion and so on and so forth. You can have that discussion, and part of having it, what you need for that discussion, is someone who can speak with authority on behalf of government, in this case, the United States, about the larger principle of religious freedom. And Mark is shaking his head.
Well, we'll come back and answer that, but we'll also come back and respond to that, but also transit to an American politician who is having some strife over some statements made about religious freedom too. We'll have that coming up in a moment.
I don't know. I just.
Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. I wouldn't allow the guys to get into it during the break, so I figured let's just get right back into our discussion here. So, and Mark, you were shaking your head that what Ron was postulating there is.
I might be misunderstanding Ron. I tend to do that when Ron and I discuss things, but the idea of someone outside of, say, the caliph and the Catholic priest discussing with one another. There's some kind of over person, like the state.
An arbitrator?
An arbitrator doing that in a position of authority, which is what Ron says, terrifies me to death. Because what that does is that places the state in a position to where they can make the decision and they can somehow be the protector of these two differing theologies. And to me, that places the state in a position that I frankly do not want the state in. And I think, it seems so, I'm going to use a philosophical word, it seems so Hobbesian in that way, that there's, that Thomas Hobbes, that we have these
Everybody go Google that, you'll find out.
We'll have these warring parties, and then we need the state to just protect all of us. That does not seem helpful, because what I'm suggesting is it is actually the state that is perpetuating the disagreements and the violence, not specifically theological debates that are doing that. I mean, I know, I understand that might be a different way, but perhaps Ron's suggesting something different. But I don't want the state arguing, settling debates, or opening even debates, or even moderating. What was the word you used, Ben?
Arbitrating.
Yeah, arbitrating between two differing theological positions.
The state can rule on my crimes, but not on my sins.
That's right.
I don't think I want that either. But we're talking here about the appointment of an ambassador for religious freedom, right? And what I'm talking about is the larger issue of religious freedom. The state is not supposed to arbitrate what is or what isn't truth in our tradition. In other traditions, that is the role of the state.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Now, so the problem is, how do we deal with people coming from these different perspectives?
Well, conflicting roles of state.
Different, yes. The problem is, if we all want to get along in this world, how do we go about dealing with the frictions that inevitably arise as a result of these different worldviews? I personally think it makes sense for stakeholders involved to appoint, or whatever, people who can speak to the larger issue that becomes of the value. How do we promote the value of religious freedom?
Well, Robert, I think this goes back actually to some of your original statements about the difficulty that the state is in trying to decide what is a political agenda and what is a religious agenda.
Yeah, the state has to tread very carefully here. It really does. And I would say, and again, this is from my perspective, but the ones who need to be doing this are, I think this is what you're getting at, are the ones who are actually involved in the debate. And if there's going to be a facilitator, might be a better word than an arbitrator, right. Someone who is going to maybe create an opportunity for the discussions about religious freedom, that kind of thing. We might be looking at a more realistic job description than what I think you're implying, that this position is one that can go in and in some way force them to negotiate some kind of compromise.
Which it is not.
Right.
It might be helpful. The four jobs, I guess, or what the United States, this Department of State and International Religious Freedom says: to promote freedom of religion and conscience throughout the world as a fundamental human right and as a source of stability for all countries. Number 2, assist emerging democracies in implementing freedom of religion and conscience. Number 3, assist religious and human rights NGOs in promoting religious freedom, and then to identify and denounce regimes that are severe persecutors on the basis of religious belief. That's on the front of their website. That's their 4 main premises of why this religious
this bureau exists.
This bureau. Thank you for the language, Ron. That this bureau exists.
Okay. Well, still, I think as you come to that, we kind of conclude this subject here. I think you are often then faced, as you said, a very ticklish situation, very difficult to tread. Where are you going to go with that? In promoting religious freedom on one hand, yet respecting somebody who doesn't want to promote religious freedom, respecting their position on that as well. So I think that's a difficult role. But as you, I forgot who said now, but it really is representing our ideal, not necessarily their ideal. Is that fair to say?
I think that is.
That's
and
fair to say.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they make a statement. The author makes a statement in the article that some of the candidates to fill this position have previous diplomatic experience, seasoned diplomats. Previous State Department experience is a major asset for any would-be ambassador to this position. To be effective. To be effective, must navigate the Byzantine maze of executive branch bureaucracy.
Yeah, right. Well,
which is another perspective on this position. It's not just that outlooking; it's the inlooking within the bureaucratic system to keep religious freedom in the formula, if you will, in the calculus. Of what's going on.
Well, Ron, isn't that always been the role of a diplomat in some fashion? Is that you're presenting a face of America while you're trying to hold the face at bay?
And also, it's probably worth noting, though I'll get some criticism for this, is that if you were to make a list of important bureaus and divisions within the United States Department of State, this would be down at the very, very, say, among the lower levels.
They have a basement office.
That's basically, yeah.
And I think that's what that's implying,
That's
is you better have a diplomat in there.
Yeah, that's right.
That knows that game.
Yeah, who knows that?
Okay. Well, someone who you would think would know the game in some fashion is certainly in New York, where Andrew Cuomo gave a radio interview where he and we'll quote him in this as well, where he talks about people who have what he considers to be extreme positions and extreme positions on abortion, or extreme position on right to life or gun rights and anything else, that they're not welcome in New York. And you've seen the reaction. The one reaction that I sent around to you guys from the National Review Online from the Corner talk about this religious freedom problem. I also look at a USA Today article where it talks a little bit about what Governor Cuomo said in this interview, where he said, who are they? Are they extreme conservatives who are right to life, pro-assault weapon, anti-gay? Is that who they are? Because if that is who they are, then they are the extreme conservatives, and they have no place in the state of New York, because that is not who New Yorkers are. The governor go out on a limb there, Robert, or saw off the limb? Or,
yeah,
he's
already dialing that one back. They were his people are working on that one, trying to dig him out of that one.
Well, I'll comment on that in a minute, because I don't think they necessarily did a very good job.
They didn't.
No, of digging him out on that.
No, they didn't.
Now he was talking about, and I'll quote the USA Today article. It says, during the interview, Cuomo detailed what he sees as a schism in the state's Republican Party, in which extreme and moderate factions are battling to define the party's ideals, and that's where the quote then starts to say, who are they? Are they extreme conservatives? They have no place in the state of New York. Is this when somebody takes a pro-life position, should they be labeled that way, as taking an extreme position? Mark, talk to you. I mean, probably the one who least likes to get into politics here.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, some of Christian theological concepts are extreme.
Yeah, we say they're radical.
They're radical. We might not use the language of extreme, but I'm more comfortable with that than this article is, as being that some of the things that we say are extreme. I mean, some of the things that Christ says are extreme. We try to make them not as extreme. Turn the other cheek, or sell all that you have and give it to the poor, or something like this. We have ways of interpreting those so that they don't sound as extreme. But I'm not. I was confused at why he would backpedal from that. Why that would be a problem to say something like that, because that might be precisely. Those who are being called extreme might own a kind of extremeness.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, I know that's
not
a very popular position.
Does that make them unwelcome in the political discussion?
I think that's the larger issue.
Yeah.
First of all,
you're not at the table any longer.
Governor Cuomo comes from a family. Well, his father had a similar habit of shooting himself in the foot, and saying that it says. And as a native New Yorker, I feel a certain
Me too.
Yes. Well, Mary
legitimacy
Cuomo, he wanted to run for president, and that's where he did shoot himself in the foot.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing to say people who believe X, Y, or Z are extreme. Mm-hmm. It's quite another to say they have no place in the state of New York. Now, what are we going to do? Does that mean we're going to just expel them, send them to New Jersey? Or God forbid,
it might have a traffic problem getting there.
You see, what does that mean? Or are we going to shoot them?
Well, here I want to go to actually one of the ways that that one of his aides is trying to backpedal from this, or trying to frame this in a different light. And I said I don't think it actually helped any. We'll talk about that in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Your comments are welcome always by email at faithmatters@thetalkstation.com, and more to come in a moment. And welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Mark Woods, Dr. Ron Monteprado, and Reverend Robert Carnegie, who's with us here today as we are talking about matters of faith. We were brought up at the end of the other segment about Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York, speaking about what he called as extreme views as not being welcome in New York. Now, one of his aides her name is Mylan Dennerstein, said that the aides are saying that Cuomo was specifically referring to candidates for statewide office. He was. Right before that, he was talking about the schism within the Republican Party. So he specifically, does that mean the candidates who hold extreme views have no place in New York politics?
Digging the hole deeper.
Yeah, that's why I felt it was not back in the. He wasn't backpedaling very much there.
Yeah, let's look at. I'm gonna. I hope I don't. Well, I'll just say, I'm okay with this. Why is it a problem that if we are strong in our faith, that we would find ourselves at an extremist odd?
Well, it's not that we have a problem.
I know, but I'm just saying, even from the very political system itself.
Right.
See, we want everybody at the table. Mm-hmm. But perhaps being Christian on some level removes you from that table, because it is the table that is the problem. I know that this is very theoretical. I understand that, but we're all assuming the legitimacy. What'd you say?
Shortens our show quite a bit too.
It does. I understand that. We're all assuming that everyone deserves a place at the table, and maybe in this kind of system it does. But perhaps there is a way in which Christianity or particular religions themselves do not fit nicely into that sort of tolerant system.
All the more reason to have a table.
That's exactly right. And
okay, maybe, Ron.
I think part of it is just the hypocrisy on display of the governor in his position. Because look, I used to be a liberal before I became a conservative. So I know how I felt back then, and I was for the underdog. I was for the minority. I was speaking up for the downtrodden and those that didn't have a voice, and he's just declared that the minority, the ones who are not in the mainstream, should be eliminated from the process. Basically, I'm being hyperbolic a little bit.
But even if it refers to candidates, I mean, it's still talking about an eliminating.
Yeah, it's just perplexing. That's I think for the fun of this is kind of pointing out the disconnect between liberal ideas and liberal actions, what actually happens when they get on the ground on this in a political fight.
I'm going to just go out on a limb and say that I think, frankly, this is a storm in a teacup. A politician made a statement that was designed to appeal to his constituency. It was designed to make worse the differences in the Republican Party in the state of New York and nationally. It was not a well-thought-out thing. And, we can invest it with all kinds of religious and philosophical and ideological significance, which I think in this case it doesn't have. At its worst, it is a statement. It is an ideological statement that by definition rules out anything and would take us away from the table, anything that is not part of particular orthodoxy. No one at this table in this room believes in that. I don't think that there are very few people in America who believe in that. And I think, frankly, that we've just taken it all out of proportion.
So basically, it's a statement that will just disappear into the ether.
I think it'll disappear into the ether, and we should all have a good laugh about it and say, boy, he did it again. He has a real knack for beating himself over the head.
The difficulty is that it comes from the governor. It's not just me saying it, and it comes from the governor. It comes from the leader of his party.
Well, governors need love and understanding. Governors need love and understanding, too.
Well, it's interesting because one of our parishioners in our congregation is a young man from, I'm probably going to not pronounce it right, Rochester. How do you say
Rochester.
it? Is it Rochester?
Did you just say Rochester?
Okay.
It's not like Gloucester.
You know it isn't.
Okay.
And I didn't know if they slurred it all together or not. But and he's in the process of getting ready to move. He was considering whether he was going to move back home for a while. Mm-hmm. And this has made him decide that he is. And he is, because he is the caricature of what the governor was disclaiming. So he's decided we need a mass migration of pro-life gun and people moving into New York.
Now, I'm going to make a segue back to our previous segment here, in a sense, because Sean Hannity, who's commentator on our station in the afternoons, says he's moving out of New York as soon as he can sell his house. Which may take a while, but as soon as he's moving out, and it didn't say he's had invitations to move to Texas, for example, but it didn't say. And I'll say that kind of going back to the previous statement, because Sean Hannity, when he says it, he may quote Cuomo's statements here, but then he comes back and says, "Well, the taxes are just really high," So it doesn't again. Ends up being not so much about the religious freedom or to have a point of view of a pro-life position, but it is about a 10% tax, state tax, and also New York City taxes and other taxes. And it says that out of his income, 61% goes to taxes.
So this was the straw that broke the camel's back.
This was
kind
a straw
of thing.
This is an example of what is sometimes referred to as Aesopianism. What you're talking about is really not what you're talking about.
Right. Which I think comes down a lot to our last discussion, really, when we're looking at whether some nations practice religious freedom or not. It may actually come down to really more of a power struggle. And it's a different, Mark, as you were saying, and more of a state issue here. And I think that this is actually he's exacerbated an issue that was already sore about New York politics. And so for New Yorkers, I think it may say something. But it's interesting to hear you say, Robert, somebody's going to move back to fight it.
It's funny because it really has. His intention, I think, was to sort of drive a wedge to divide the Republican Party, but actually it's done just the opposite.
Right.
It's when you get out into those extremes.
When your friend gets an estimate of what his taxes will be up there.
Yeah, there may be another. He may change his tune. No, I think he's willing to sacrifice to take on the issue.
Yeah, right.
That's why there are many people have moved to North Carolina for just
right.
the mirror image of that reason.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, it's interesting when he looks at, because the discussion was again about politics in the state and schism within the Republican Party, and we see that there are discussions across both parties about difficulties that both parties have. And you just came out in the news in the last day or so that even Senator Kay Hagan now is going to have a Democrat opponent in the primary. Now, it's a guy who's never been in politics before, but he's from nearby. He's in Pender County, not too far away. And he says that his name is Will Stewart. He is a computer repair and website building business carpenter. And on his website, he says that he believes that Senator Hagan is just politics as usual and the status quo. and that he lists campaign finance reform, stopping the Patriot Act renewal in 2015, and decriminalization or legalization of marijuana as his platform of issues there.
So he's going left.
So he's
of
going
her.
left of her. Yeah. So in some sense there. So again, when a governor like that speaks of trying to brand a party issue, there's always somebody on the left or the right that's going to challenge that. In the same way here. So I think it's going to be interesting when we look and see whether or not issues. We just had the March for Life in Washington. Whether or not issues like that, like right to life, will have a play. Or will it come down to more of guns and butter issues that we talked about some before? Will it come down to that when we get into the political arena? And I think the governor will say it's going to be much more of the guns and butter issue. But we have to. But we, I really don't like those guys who take extreme positions.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is Robert? I know you follow these matters of where we are with. Some social issues in terms of politics. Do you think it's going to make a play in this coming election? I mean, between Obamacare and other issues as well.
Well, I don't know that they're going to be in the between the two candidates, whoever those two wind up to be, but it will be in the process of getting there. Mm-hmm. It always is, and because those are base issues. So you have different. Subsets of your base that the women and the all these different interest groups, and so from a political point of view, you do have to kind of address these certain issues, and the media is going to force it out because the media is not going to want to talk about. In many ways, the real issues. They like these other issues, But mm-hmm. When I say real, I mean what the country is really most concerned with right now is the economy and jobs. Let's face it.
Right.
So, we're going to see all these issues come onto the table now. How many actually stick? When they get thrown against the wall,
or how many are invited to the table?
Exactly. Right.
Again, if you have comments on these issues or ideas about other programs you would like us to address, you can send us an email, faithmatters@dtalkstation.com. That's faithmatters@dtalkstation.com. And again, for Reverend Robert Cornegy, Reverend Mark Woods, and Dr. Ron Monteperdo, I'm Ben Ball. Thank you for joining us
for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com. Faith Matters is a production of the Talk Station.